What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate. Look, Living Corporate is a digital media network, right? Not just a single podcast. Okay, hear me again. I said a digital media network, not just a single podcast. So when I say digital media network, what does that mean? Digital media network means that we're creating all sorts of different types of media. All sorts of different types of media. Podcasts, vodcasts, blogs, right? Talk chat spaces, you know what I mean? Social media content, right? Threads, things of that nature. All types of content. And what is that network? What is this content all meant to do? It's meant to center and amplify Black and brown people at work. Center and amplify Black and brown people at work. So often in this whole DEI space, or whatever you want to call it, DEI, IED, JEI, you know what I'm saying? The RZA, Wu-Tang, whatever you calling it, right? Shout out to Wu-Tang, forever. But whatever you calling it, there's this common thread of centering of the most overrepresented, right? So what am I really trying to say? A lot of this DEI work centers white people and white feelings. That's really what this space has devolved into, or maybe it always was. I mean, honestly, we've talked about that ad nauseum for the past several years. But the point is that Living Corporate exists to center and amplify the marginalized voices, Black and brown, queer, Black and brown disabled, Black and brown women, Black and brown trans, Black and brown non-binary, Black and brown first gen, Black and brown people at work. That's what we do. And we interview executives, elected officials, activists, artists, influencers, the list goes on and on and on. And we're always, always, always bringing it back to the experiences of the most marginalized. And we're speaking truth to power by challenging the very systems that exist and continue to persist to benefit everybody but Black and brown people at work. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we do. We're not really here to like coddle or pat big corporations on the back that make billions of dollars every year. We're here to really have authentic, real conversations in a corporate world. Okay? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what we're not trying to do. That's what we're doing. Shout out to the Living Corporate team. I'm so excited about this conversation you're about to hear. We'll be back. See you soon. Maceo Owens, what's going on? How you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Now look, I know you've built your brand. You're doing your thing through employee resource groups, ERG strategy as a whole. Let's just get right to it. I'm trying to get to it today, Maceo.
Okay.
Why ERGs?
Why ERGs? ERGs really have the power to change lives. And that sounds like really mushy, but in reality, they've changed my life. And I know so many other people who've gotten involved in ERGs who really have been able to change the trajectory of their careers. And not just that, when we're thinking about the experience of members, like an ERG, having a community of people who get you can really be the determining factor of, is this a place I want to be? Or even just their quality of life, being that people have to spend so much time at work anyway. So there's so much potential with ERGs, but they're so underutilized and so, I don't know, kind of done wrong, honestly. So yeah.
So we're going to get to that. So first off, though, you said, that ERGs changed your life. Let's talk about that. When you say that, what role have ERGs played in your early career development and then just throughout your career?
Yep. So when I first got into the ERG space, I was a support agent, so barely making above minimum wage. And I just so happened to stumble across ERGs. Like my manager was not trying to give me any sort of opportunities to grow. And I was just like, I'm over it. Just so happened that I found out about the Black ERG and I was like, I didn't even know there were other Black people here. So by getting involved in it, honestly, there were so many opportunities for me to kind of demonstrate my ability to lead and to project manage, which actually landed me into my first salaried role. And a year later, actually, I landed my first 6-figure role, again, using the skills that I learned from an employee resource group. And just having like access to new people, like your network. I always say your network is your net worth. So growing my network. And even then, like, if we're even talking about money wise, to go from a place where you're doing barely above minimum wage to 6 figures, like the things that that's been able to do for me, that's why I'm so passionate about it. Not to mention all the skills that I've learned that I know I could take into any role I wanted to.
You know, it's interesting, right? So, like, you know, Living Corp has been around for about half a decade. We've been talking to all sorts of leaders and people, right? So all types of people in these spaces. It's interesting for me. I think about my experience with ERGs. I think historically, like, ERGs for me have been a great place to commiserate, but not necessarily always a consistent place for me to get like actual support to navigate the actual workplace stuff I'm navigating it. Right now, it's great. If I might be talking, I might run into some older black folks who tell me, well, you got to dress this way, and you got to talk this way, and you got to learn this technical skill. But not necessarily as much on like, hey, actually not that I'm perfect, but I'm actually a pretty good, strong performer. I need help on this, like on some mobility stuff. Mm-hmm. You said earlier about the fact that ERGs are doing things. You said that there are some gaps there, right? Talk to me a little bit about when you think about ERG strategy, what are like some common mistakes or things that you're seeing that need to be addressed and rectified?
I could take up our entire time with this. I mean, even with you saying like ERG strategy, most ERGs don't have a strategy, and they'll have some sort of obscure plan on what the ERG is. Most of them, even when you think about a strategy, it's mapping out where you're at versus where you want to be. And most ERGs have not taken the time to actually define what is this program and what do we want to be. So different ERG leaders will be thinking that this program exists for different reasons, when that may not be the case at all. So there's no progression then, because we don't even know what we're progressing towards. So that's the biggest thing. Like, there's no alignment in that. Not to mention, just a lot of the existing ERG models are extremely, I don't even want to say out of date. I don't know if they were ever in date, but they serve their purpose for the time they were around. But there's no true ERG development that has been happening over the years, and no clarity on what that means, which is why I do the work that I do with the ERG movement and clarifying, actually using business development principles. So I'm not really making this stuff up out of thin air. These are principles that have already been in existence. How you stand up a functioning business, same framework, honestly, with standing up a functioning employee research program.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, like the key points of feedback I'm often providing is like, hey, like I'll ask questions like, hey, what are we trying to actually achieve? Like with this ERG, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, then of course there's different schools of thought related to like ERG versus BRG versus affinity group. And like, I think honestly, so much of that, Maceo, is people manufacturing different taxonomies to make money. Ultimately, I believe that your ERG needs to be connected to your performance management strategy and your actual performance management principles. So like, and I think also it should be connected to your actual business and go-to-market strategy. So like, if you're not mobilizing your ERGs to like actually connect and help people perform and show up better and give them the tools they need so they can be upwardly mobile, or frankly horizontally mobile or outwardly mobile, then like, what are we doing? I think so many times, especially like in this like really high octane workplace where like inflation and these things continue to rise and like work-life balance, the line between work-life balance continues to blur, people don't really necessarily have all the capacity and interest for like parties and like ornamental performative things, right? I'm curious, when you talk about ERG strategy and like, hey, these are just business principles, how to set these things up, like who in the organization needs to be plugged into an ERG for it to be successful?
There's so much that you just mentioned there that to speak on with that, I guess, and I can kind of address some of them with answering that question, because depending on what the ERG program is, that will determine the answer. Not every ERG program is an ERG program. Like, for instance, some ERG programs literally just exist to benefit employees. Let me kind of reframe that a little bit. Some ERG programs literally just exist with the purpose of building employee belonging, and that's the business case of it. And that's all leadership wants. Some companies, especially post everything with this whole diversity wave, are like, we actually are not doubling down on the diversity piece, but we do care about our employees who are here and like making sure that they're happy. And some ERG programs are just that. Other ERG programs might lean into more so the external, how does this impact our go-to-market strategy or even like our marketing strategy? In that case, you're definitely going to have leaders who lead those departments that you're looking to impact as part of the program early on too, so that they understand like this is what our program is eventually hoping to be, even if we're not in a place right now to impact those strategies. Long term, that is the plan. This is kind of like the timeline when we expect we'll be there. How do you see us impacting your team? Again, they have to be aligned with this though, because a lot of the times ERGs are just charging towards a goal and they haven't even aligned with the person who leads the team to bring this goal to life. And then they're disappointed when they have this whole thing baked out and it's not getting implemented. So getting that leader involved early on is important, and getting alignment on what this program again is and is not for them is going to be key. And that's why that vision part is so important, because if you don't have alignment there, then again, you might be doing work that will never actually get implemented. But I also want to caution, because this is a newer train of thought that I'm seeing with employee resource groups. At the end of the day, these are people who have a passion towards their specific community. That doesn't always mean that they're qualified to be the people to impact the go-to-market strategy or the marketing strategy. And sometimes by them doing that, that's actually not going to be what's best for the business. Like maybe truly where the customers are at for that business right at that moment is not the most progressive thing, which is what the employee research group is going to push every single time, because they care. They want to see the most progressive thing. Oftentimes, ERG leaders will have to have someone responsible to balance that out. So I will just say, if there is an interest in ERGs impacting the external world through the company, there has to be a voice in a diversity team, a consultant who is really a specialist at that specific thing to come in and kind of provide some parameters there.
No, 100%. I do think that like there's this like, I mean, some of it is lazy, some of it's name an ism, but it's like, oh, you're of this group, then you should be able to tell us how everybody in this group reacts to our product or reacts to our service or what they think about our brand. And so there needs to be some degree of thoughtfulness and strategy when it relates to like even mobilizing people within a particular affinity, within a cultural group or space, and asking those questions, right? In addition to that, whoever is actually responsible for that, like they need to be in coordination with the ERG group and like whatever the feedback they receive. And this is like to your point, like the caution I would, and there's an art and a science to it, because let's say you have a group of people like in a particular affinity group and they have no expertise, they have no go-to-market expertise. That would be weird though, because that would mean that you don't have any diversity in your go-to-market team, but I mean, that'd be happening. So anyway, let's say you don't. So then, well, first you have a larger problem. You need to diversify your go-to-market team. So that's a systemic thing that needs to be addressed. But in the immediate right now, that means that somebody on that go-to-market team needs to be able to have the skill set to receive and listen and get feedback from this group, but also apply it through the lens of their own technical expertise so that it's something that is viable for the company. Now, the challenge of that is, again, like it's a fairly circuitous problem, because you can then turn around and say, well, who's to say that your lens that you're applying my feedback through is perfect or largely accurate? And it's like, yeah, that goes back to why y'all need to diversify your team. Because I would think like, you think to your point, like about depending on what you want your ERG group to do. And I'd love to get like push back on me on this. Like if I'm like, I'd love because it's different perspectives and there's multiple answers, not one single answer. My thing about it is that like a lot of these like initiatives or efforts that are meant to create senses of belonging for non-white, non-straight, non-Christian, non-able-bodied people, they end up being really ornamental or like really like very decorative if they're not connected back to something that is revenue generating or there isn't a clear business case for it. So my position would be that ERGs, again, BRGs, because some people say affinity groups are really just for belonging. ERGs are for internal support and mobilization, and BRGs are to really support all those things plus go to market and product strat. My thing is like, I would think that the fully matured version and really the way to make sure that you continue to get support, sponsorship, and budget would be to make sure that you have a clear business case for for your group. Do you disagree with that? You have a different
I have a different perspective. I'm not going to fully say disagree, but I think this will kind of take it back to the development model that you just outlined with affinity group, ERG, BRG. Historically, that's been what it is. That has never felt right to me. It's never made sense to me. And that's why I came up with the ERG movement model, which is an actual development from what does an ERG look like at infancy versus maturity. Because the concept is, especially today, in today's modern age where businesses are doubling down when it comes to money and spend, you can't have a program that just benefits employees and has zero business impact, because then it's just bleeding money from the company, and no company is actually going to really want to invest in that more and more. So regardless of whatever moniker is being used for the ERG program, if you have an ERG program, it has to benefit the business and the employees. It has to be both. That being said, the order in that and the approach to that is what really matters, which is, again, going back to the vision piece. If a company doesn't know where they want their program to be, it's going to be hard for them to measure that impact on how close it is to being there and to having those impacts. Again, most companies, especially in like the 2020 George Floyd wave, everyone launched a program without putting any thought into it. They just said, we're just going to do it the grassroots way, which means that they invested no time and thought into it. They just told employees, here's a charter. Yeah.
Get together.
Big pet peeve. And unfortunately now a lot of companies are doubling back and like, wow, all of our leads are burnt out, we got low engagement. So all that to say, because they didn't establish at the beginning what measurement looks like in terms of measuring whether this program is a success, that's why we start to come up with things like business impact automatically means go to market and revenue generating.
Right.
Here's something funny, which I haven't talked about publicly yet. I don't think I've said it, but in my mind, I've been thinking it. It's so interesting to me that with every other employee benefit, when we think about health benefits or even learning and development, no one's asking for these non-revenue producing benefits to produce revenue. Like, I don't know where this concept of employee resource groups have to produce revenue. Actually, I do know where it came from. It's because we didn't outline at the beginning, well, what is this program doing? So now immediately the easiest thing is to say, oh, well, we're producing revenue. Where oftentimes employee resource groups don't produce revenue. It is a cost center, but cost centers can be justified. Learning and development programs are a lot more mature oftentimes in employee resource groups. That's why no one's asking them to produce revenue and things like that. Because again, you just mentioned, if we are doing things that affect the outer world, we have to have someone who's competent on both sides to make that happen. And that very rarely exists unless you have a middle person that's like an expert in diversity and an expert in that specific thing, which oftentimes even D&I teams aren't experts at marketing. So
no,
even then, unless you have that go-to-market piece, no company is right now thinking, oh, business impact means that we have to have this middle person who's going to be the communicator between. No one's thinking that. But everyone is using this business impact almost as like an excuse to kind of keep doing what they're doing, and eventually we'll be able to impact the business, when that was never going to be the thing originally. When I think of business impact, and I think what most companies think, whether they're willing to admit it or not, once they admit it, it'll be so much easier, would be impact on employee sense of belonging, which a lot of them are measuring. Okay, let's correlate that to employee resource groups, since you're already measuring that, and employee satisfaction. Some companies, even retention. Retention is not something you can measure in a year, though. That's something you have to do like over a 10-year span to truly be able to say. So when you hear people say employee resource groups impact retention, that's not necessarily true unless they've proven it with numbers, and I've never seen the numbers. So, but I'll just say that's an example of business impact. If we're going to approach it like that, we should have metrics that we're trying to base it off of. And oftentimes, because it is an employee resource group, even if it's a business resource group, it still has to have a community of people behind it. Because if you're just doing business impact with an employee resource group and you don't even have a community of people who feel safe, you really just have a diversity task force. And if you have it just doesn't make any sense. So that was a lot.
Not at all. No, not at all. No, it was great. So I hear you. I think you asked the question like, where does it come from? And I've openly said I can be pretty pessimistic, right? So where it comes from my mind is that these corporations are really focused on making money, and they oftentimes look at cost centers to cut first. And they also oftentimes see people as cost centers while we're seeing all these layoffs. Very reactive, short-sighted, frankly, patriarchal frameworks. So when I think about like, hey, look, this thing over here, even if it is not directly revenue generating, it's helping to optimize this or accelerate that. So to your point, like, we agree. First of all, we disagree at all, but we agree on the business case, or you used the word, Maceo. You used the word. You said the impact. We agree on there needs to be a clear impact. My thing is the more easily you're able to connect that impact to something to show, hey, we're saving or accelerating, or then that is helpful. But to your point, like, it does require a certain level of a high level of intentionality, strategy, and org design to make sure that the right people are in place for that to even be mobilized. Because it's not going to just happen by you putting a bunch of the same people in a group and say, hey, go do that.
And
now, to your point,
I was going to say, sorry, and metrics too. It has to have metrics. Metrics is not a strong suit in the diversity space. Sometimes even in the HR space as a whole, it's not a strong suit. So that's another big thing that's missing in so many programs. So even when it comes to us talking about, and I agree with you in that, if we are making it easy and actually truly saving the business money or actually truly making the business money, okay. But even in the things that I've seen and initiatives that I've seen, I wouldn't say that we are actually even tracking true metrics to actually say. And that's why essentially they look at us. They look at the program and say, like, well, you said you were going to make us money. Where's the numbers? And because it's not a strong suit, we don't have numbers. So now it's just not a good look.
No, 100%. You set yourself up for failure. Like, you set yourself up for failure if you tell your employer or a client, whatever, hey, we're gonna move this thing. If you don't have access or the skill set or both, really the access first, but then you shouldn't say that because that's goofy. They're going to out loud give you so much runway, but in their mind, you have a countdown to show them something to justify. And not to say they're eager to watch you fail, but they're happy to cut it when they're able to say, if they say, hey, well, this isn't the value. To your point, right? Like, we've talked about data on Living Corporate, like, for years, right? And it's so interesting, Maceo. Like, I'm coming from big consulting places, right? And then I've also worked in tech. The data piece for HR and certainly DEI, it's the hardest thing for people to even have access to. Like, I've worked in organizations, I've consulted for organizations where HR doesn't always have access to all their own data. I've worked in organizations, of course, where DEI is gate kept by HR, so they don't have access to data. And then when you think about the fact that, like, beyond the HR and the people data, right? So, like, because I remember there are times I like, honestly, like, I've built outside of Living Corporate, like, analytic solutions, and, like, just to demo them, like, at the firm I was with or at the tech company I was with, getting our own data to demo the product was like a huge thing. And there's this genuine fear of exposure and accountability that comes with that exposure. And then frankly, I think that there's just like, I do think that Americans are, like, really afraid of math. I really do. I think numbers scare us. I think we love to talk. I don't know if we like to look at a bunch of numbers. It just scares us. Here's the thing. It's not just looking at your HRIS data and your sentiment data and whatever else, because typically all these different data sets are in different, like, they're in different places in your org, right? your benefits data. It's also about having an infrastructure that even has all that data available, because a lot of times the organizations be like, well, actually we don't have it. But it's also about taking that data and effectively marrying it with your customer experience data, right? So like, which also needs to be, one, existent, two, like queryable and organized in a way that you can make something of it. And then you need somebody who has a skill set to bring those very complex data sets together to even like make determinations. So like you think about, to your point, like, hey, this ERG supports belonging or supports retention. We'll say, okay, well, what are your data sets within your HRIS? What are your columns within your HRIS data set that you're bringing together to determine belonging and to determine retention and to determine X, Y, and Z? Because there's not a retention column in your there's not a belonging column, there's not a belonging column in your HRIS data. Like that's a formula that you have to create. There's not a, like, it's going to take some degree of analysis and math to say, hey, this workshop over here resulted in this movement from like in the market. Like that's, and like, it's just tough, right? It's doable, but it takes a degree of expertise and access.
I agree. I think that I have a funny advantage here, ironically having not gone to college, but being a super math nerd in high school. I think I just have a love for numbers already. I will say that there's so much that can be done. And I think that because it feels so intimidating, we don't even a lot of people don't even try. But I will say, I have been able to learn, like to actually learn Google Sheets, not just putting stuff in a spreadsheet, but like you said, marrying the data sets together. I've been able to learn that off of YouTube. Looker Studio, which you can use, free tool through Google, just like Gmail. If you have access to Gmail, you have access to Looker, where you can have data visualization. Even in Google Sheets, you can make beautiful dashboards, and no one ever does that. And it's like, it doesn't have to be super complicated, but I will say, as long as we remain as an industry on this beginner level, we're going to continue to be treated on this beginner level. Eventually, we're going to have to elevate. Like the fact that I took a month to really learn this. Now, even at other parts of HR teams, whenever I work with a company, their other teams will be like, you built that dashboard, can you help us? And it's like, it's such a core skill to understand data, but it's not even tried in so many cases. And even like you were saying, with measuring belonging, again, something that would have to be A/B tested over the course of years to truly be able to say that it impacts that. But even, let's just say you were to look at your engagement scores from your NPS surveys, and you are just going to see what's the correlation between someone being in an ERG and feeling that sense of belonging and someone not being in one. There could be there's actually two ways that could really go. You might see that people in the ERG do feel a better sense of belonging, which would be great. And even on the other hand, you might see that people in an ERG don't feel a sense of belonging, and that even more so justifies the ERG. For me, I don't know. You really have me ranting today. I really get to go like this granular with it. But for me, it's just like there's no effort in even. Why would that not be the first thing that we would measure? Like, even as we're talking about an ERG program, why don't we have the numbers that we're comparing this to? Or even how you were saying, like when we're first pitching an ERG program to leadership, you have to do a whole slide deck and the whole bit. And we're telling leadership something. Why are there no numbers that we're using to support this? And why are we not tracking this over time? Like that, it just doesn't make sense in terms of really wanting this program to be sustainable long term. It's, again, it can just be embarrassing when later they go back to the slide deck that you made to get updates and you have nothing there. But that being said, there is ways to prove responsibility with the data that we do have access to. Again, the employee engagement survey is a really easy one where you can just get an aggregate number from whatever company is doing your employee engagement survey. They can give you the averages. Or even with ERGs, I'm specifically ERGs, less of D&I. That's a whole nother conversation. But even specifically with ERGs, like most ERGs are only measuring how many people come to their meeting or how many people are in their channel.
That's it. They're measuring attendance
And
and participation.
The most basic.
And I would say right the most surface
Yes.
of those things. No, you're absolutely right. You know, and it's interesting, right? So this tech company that I used to work for, they went through layoffs, right? And they laid off like a quarter, I think, of their workforce. But it resulted in like half of their black employees being gone. And I remember when I looked at like, the only reason I knew that was because I saw the employee count in that Black ERG Slack channel get cut in half, right? But when I reached out to a leader about it and I said, hey, like you need to look at this because I don't think y'all did a disparate impact analysis. And they said, oh, we don't even, she's like, it's like, I'm trying to get the data that I let me have. I'm like, it's just to your point about like this data piece. The reality is that organizations, they measure what they actually invest in, right? Right. Like, so yeah, we'll let you like spend your little time and we might even give you like a stipend, which might be like, I don't know, $3,000-$4,000 a year. Like, right. No disrespect.
That's pretty good, honestly, nowadays. That's a healthy budget nowadays.
Maceo, that is depressing that you said that. And so you're getting 0.0000001% of y'all's company's profits. Cool. My thing is that when it's where there's real investment involved and there's real care, not care on, cause see, I don't really wag my finger at the employees trying to figure things out and get it going. To your point at the top of this conversation, you were talking about like, there's business principles in play that everyone may not be plugged into or like be thinking about. This is like their super part-time, most times unpaid job. Some of the most progressive companies are giving stipends, but like most times they're not. So like people are just trying to like, with the crumbs of energy they have and a bunch of passion, make it work. I'm looking at the executive leadership of like, look, why don't you push and challenge and ask for the data, or better yet, put some type of executive sponsor who can get the right A players involved to make sure that we do have measuring sticks. Because if it was something that you thought was really interesting, or that would be really revenue generating or brand enhancing or both or whatever, then you would say, oh, you know what? I'm gonna get so and so on that. I'm gonna get so and so on that. But you're not, because this is more. Oftentimes, it feels like this is not about ERG specifically, but more like just initiatives around marginalized people. Their programs in placation. They're not really like seen as like, hey, this is something we're going to hang our hat on, that we're going to moonshot for. It's just not that. Also, you're not rambling.
No, I mean, if I agree with you, I have to put some responsibility on the diversity team in the first place. Because I understand what you mean with executives. Like, why don't you push for it? You could, if you really cared, you could push for it, which, yes, let's be honest, again, those executive teams mainly aren't marginalized in many ways. So they don't inherently care. They might care if we tell them what to care about and how to, but even if we're talking executive sponsorship in general, most people don't use their executive sponsors well enough anyway. They don't know what to ask or how to ask it. And then on the other hand, execs are afraid to give the D&I team the data even, which is sad, but especially ERG leaders, because that's dangerous information to have. When you think about it, like if an ERG leader did have the actual proof on their computer, raw data that says, we're not hiring black people, we don't have enough black people, and nothing has been done about this over the course of this so many years, and I've been an ERG leader and I've witnessed this. That's stuff that you can really go on blast about. And that's harmful to the company. And like you said, most companies, they don't want ownership in that. Even then you might say, well, at least the diversity team should be trusted with it. But if we're talking the reality of how a lot of diversity teams were formed over the past couple of years. And this is just me observing, because again, I don't even associate myself as a diversity person. I'm like an ERG person. But just the illustration that I give a lot is with someone who's really good at baking a cake, and how that doesn't justify you to run a cake business. And if you ever watch if you ever watch like Kitchen Nightmares or anything like that, where there's people who like, they love this stuff, they're not good at it though. Yeah.
But they trash.
And oftentimes with diversity and people, a lot of people who got into the diversity space, they did it because they love it, not because they're good at it. And sometimes they will take what they love and they will say the wrong things, even business wise. And this happened so much this year, even where big companies were financially harmed because the teams that they trusted with something that had to do with diversity gave them bad advice because they were speaking about something that they're passionate about, not what's best for the business. So I think that being said, I don't know. I'm not trying to land in any hot water, because I do love people who are in the diversity space overall. I do think that there's work though, in terms of maybe a reflection with a lot of people who got into the space of like, is this really what you want to do? And are you the best person for this? Because if you're not being trusted by executives, that means that you, even though this is your job, haven't even proven responsibility. And you can still come back from that. Even at this current moment, you can start learning about how to effectively track things and how to build dashboards and how to make strategic efforts based on the data. Because executives do respect that, as long as it's done reasonably, as long as you have alignment with the team on how this is being approached. And I've seen this with ERG programs. This is something that I do ERG wise, where it's like, I get the numbers, I get what we're measuring, I get how and why, and I'm able to have that conversation, because data can be the universal language if used right. But just so many people, again, they don't try, and it's just not a good look at all.
So I don't think you're landing. I mean, well, I don't know. Live in corporate, we say all kinds of things over here.
I don't want to hurt any feelings. I'll say that.
I'll say this. Oh no! I mean, you got to hurt people's feelings. I mean, it's much better to hurt somebody's feelings than they get hurt in real life for real. You know what I'm saying? I'd much rather hurt your feelings than your pockets be hurt later. Please let me hurt your feelings so we can move forward. You know what I'm saying? But to your point, right? I think, and there's nuance here, right? So, there's somebody, honestly, like a person I really trust and I admire, Jackie Clayton, who's the head of talent acquisition and DEI over at Textio, right? So Jackie was in hunt for someone on her DEI team, and she was talking about, she wrote a long post. This is not me telling nobody business. We're talking about a post she wrote. She's like, look, passion does not replace expertise. And because people don't take DEI seriously, it's one of the most underpaid and frankly high revolving, in terms of just like high turnover roles in corporate America. People be like, oh, they're passionate. Okay, great. That'll be great, because I ain't gonna give them no budget, and I'm gonna pay them half of what I typically pay everybody else, and I'm gonna call them a head of X, Y, and Z, but they really gonna be the equivalent of a junior director or a senior manager, and that'll be that, right? So it's really like it's a shell game, and so there are a significant group of people out there that are passionate but have no real expertise, and then worse than that, have no actual desire to build expertise.
Truly. I'll go for it.
I was going to say, I'll also say though, like in terms of balancing that nuance, is that there's also people who have genuine expertise and who are like just deeply disrespected and undervalued by their orgs, right? So like, I'd say this to somebody I've talked to, Maceo, Live in Corporate, we've recorded over 1,000 podcasts over the last 5 years. I've talked to dozens of DEI professionals who genuinely know what they're talking about, but just because of the system and the culture and the leadership, they don't have the buy-in. So it's tough to necessarily tie executive trust with DEI competence, with practitioner competence. However, practitioner incompetence most assuredly will not help drive
And
executive
to be
leadership.
fair, I mentioned that scenario of executives would trust if, but oftentimes executives aren't even there. So to be fair, like, yes, you make a go.
They
I'm
not.
just saying in the event, yes, it's good, but,
Right.
but
Right. Right. Like if in the event that they're actually
mhm,
willing to be supportive, it'd be great
yeah,
if you was
yeah,
competent.
exactly. And again, it's not just the passion. Like for me, even with me getting into ERG space where people will be like, well, you didn't have formal education. I am a project manager, like at heart. I like getting things organized and I'm an operator. I wouldn't even say a project. I'm an operator really at heart. So that's why that is like my background and that's what I'm good at. So less of passion and more so
Mm-hmm.
good at. It's nice when the two meet, but a lot of people who are in the space aren't actually good at how to be in D&I. You have to have hard conversations with executives. You have to be willing to tell people what they need to hear, even if it is if they're higher than you, even if they don't want to hear it. Like you have to be able to do certain things that a lot of people that's not what they're good at. They care about it, but they're not good at it. So even the
Word.
people, like a lot of people who even have the skills in terms of like the hard skills, the soft skills of like communication and stuff, it also has to be part of it too, because otherwise you're going to meet that blocker. There's always going to be at least one person on the leadership team who's like, I don't get this. And if you can't get past that and you don't have the skills there, and yes, it takes practice, but when you get to that point, that breaking point, and anyone who's been in that situation of having to justify themselves know what that is, and you're not willing to stand on it, like it's not going to go beyond that. And oftentimes across DNI and ERGs, I see this as the case. And again, sometimes executives don't want the change. That's more than anything. That's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing at companies that I'm working with across industries is that a lot of companies are just like, we don't need the diversity stuff. We care about employees who are already here. We just want them to stay longer. And you have to be okay with that if you are. That's one of the main reasons why the D&I space is not for me, because then I can see where that passion will take over and take over reason. Because if it's like, well, you all know this is the right thing to do and you all don't want to do it, I might start making some bad decisions. But overall, that's what I'm seeing in companies more is that executives are okay with doing the bare minimum. And you have to make that decision on, okay, am I going to be okay here doing the bare minimum? So there's so many factors.
No, you're absolutely right. My only response, and I'm gonna ask you this last question. We can get up out of here. My only response to that is the reality is that retaining talent requires more, right, than the bare minimum. Than executives are oftentimes willing to appreciate and invest in. So you think about like this next generation of talent, and shoot, millennials included. They ain't about to like. We can tell when y'all don't care, right? And so, hey, if you don't want to put in an extra X amount $1,000 a year to drive your talent attraction programs, okay, you're gonna still need to put in X more on this other side to retain the talent that you have. And so like that's to your point, like the unwillingness to change. I think that there's a gap in understanding that you don't need to just change to attract talent. You're going to need to change to retain it too. Right.
I was just going to say that's a fact. And that is being in diversity. You have to be willing to fight that fight to explain the change. Cause I couldn't agree with you more, but that is such a fight to get people to understand that, especially for people who are just like, well, this is how we do it here. And they don't really care about, I've been at companies where they've literally told me, like, we don't really care. Like our employees can leave. We don't actually care. Literally word for word, like we can just get new ones where they're not piecing together that being a company that cares about people will actually make for a better company where employees want to work harder for it. So if you want to fight, like people who want to fight that fight, I give you all so many props. It's just not me. I'll just say.
No, I respect it. I've had those situations like in my consulting life, and then even having conversations with HR, like when I moved to industry before I moved to living corporate full time. And I remember laughing like in their face because it was like, hey, you understand that that's like extremely expensive, right? When you sit back and say, we don't care if there's a revolving door. It's so funny when like there'll be like directors and even some VPs that'll say that. And then like 12 months later, your COO or your CFO looks at the day, like, hey, like this is expensive. Like where? So, okay. Now look, you've mentioned it at the top of this to talk about the model because we talked about affinity group versus ERG versus BRG. Let's talk a little bit about the ERG movement, right? Like you're coming from some incredible brands. I'm not going to give them no free marketing. Y'all know what it is, but y'all check out the link in the show notes. Y'all want to learn more about Maceo's background, but I'm going to just say right now, incredible brands, globally known brands. And you decided to focus on your own organization, the ERG movement, full time. Talk to me about what precipitated that decision and what you're most proud of when it comes to the ERG.
Yeah, I'll say thing one, this is how I've always felt that ERGs should be able to stand on their own. And that even based on what we're talking about with budget and how much companies want to allocate to these programs, having a full-time program manager felt very hypocritical, me getting paid so much, and groups oftentimes don't get added up nearly how much I was getting paid. It doesn't, yes, the impact is there, but what could the ERGs do if they were able to use the budget towards my role, towards programming? And even then, not just specifically at that company, but in general, when it comes to that role, it feels like, wow, what if ERGs were really just responsible enough to handle their budget and to do this without needing a full-time person? Isn't that what companies kind of want? And for me, again, it just felt hypocritical at some point to be like, actually, this program is thankfully the one I was with, they're actually at a point where they truly are getting to the point where they don't need me anymore. And that shows so much because most people don't go into this role thinking of it as I'm working myself out of a job, but that's always how I've approached it. It's like, I know I'm doing good if I'm not needed. So for me, even with the ERG movement model that I created, part of that is helping the program to eventually be at a point where it's on its own. So again, it wouldn't make any sense for me to remain there just collecting a paycheck if I'm not needed. So kind of modeling the behavior that I'm hoping to eventually see at companies. Some companies are so huge that it does definitely justify having a program manager. But in general, for smaller companies where if you all just had processes and data systems that you use, like you can really truly just have this program do its thing and not use a whole bunch of money on a person or a software, which most of the time you don't need. You just need basic systems and processes. So that's kind of what came about with the change. But I'm so excited for what the ERG movement is doing and what it's going to do. We're having our official community launch in November, which I'm excited about. But just with the amount of free resources that we've been able to give ERG leaders, between an ERG idea hub with over 5,000 examples of ERG programming across companies, across industries, and counting, that's growing every single day, between the podcast episodes, the blog posts, the actual metric of what's the percentage of Fortune 500 companies that have ERGs, because believe it or not, for the past 15 years, we've been saying a made up metric and it's quoted everywhere, all over the internet. 90% of Fortune 500 companies have ERGs, where that was never a fact. So actually just being able to give ERGs legitimacy, and a huge part of that is through even the ERG movement model, is something that I'm incredibly proud of, but there's still a lot of work to be done in the space.
So a couple things. First of all, I want to say it's incredible, and it just reflects just why like Black women are so dope. And I'm biased, but like I don't care. It's my platform. I can say that. In that there's this level of community and selflessness, right? So like you said, I'm collecting this check that you need for your survival. And you said, you know what? No, I'm going to move in faith and in purpose to my mission and my principles to do this. And then for this money to then be utilized to create and support a more inclusive, fair, higher sense of belonging workforce, supported, empowered, internally and outwardly mobile. I can, go on and on and on. That's dope. The second thing I think is great is that the lack of the abundance mindset to say, I don't need to collect a check from you to know that impact is being delivered. I need to get you to a particular place and then I can go away. I 100% agree with that, especially for organizations that are like less than like 500 people, right? You're talking about like these smaller startup, like these smaller organizations. Look, when you can start getting to the thousands, then yeah, for sure. Like there needs to be some level of guidance and oversight. But even that at a certain point of maturity is not going to be the same as when you started. So that's incredible. Look, Maceo, like we could keep on talking. I told you I was going to honor the time. Before I let you go, any parting words?
On pressure. No, I will shout out the ERG movement, which normally I don't do, but truly there's some incredible things happening there. And even I'll close with this piece because you just mentioned, like, for the record, I come from a very, very low income background. So the concept of me in the course of 2 years going from minimum wage to 6 figures and then giving that up shows that I'm really, truly believing in what's happening here, not even just from a financial perspective, but in, like you said, in purpose. So I want anybody who's listening who is an ERG leader, even if you're not familiar with ERGs, an ERG member that's active can be just as impactful as an ERG leader. If you are an ERG leader, be willing to do something different so you can get a different result and a better result. And check out the ERG movement. That's what I'll say.
Dope. Maceo, we continue your friend of the show. Excited to talk to you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peace. Yo, thank you so much for hanging out with us this week on Living Corporate. Make sure that you check our content out on living-corporate. Please say the dash.com. You can see our entire network of shows. We have all types of content that we've been publishing. That's all focused on Black and brown folks at work, different lenses, mental health, career development, executive leadership, right? Wellness, freedom, all types of different lenses, but it's all focused on historically marginalized, oppressed, exploited, underinvested, disinvested people. That's what we're here for. So also click the link in the show notes. Make sure you check out our merch. Cop a hoodie. It's getting cool. So make sure you go on the website. If you don't want to cop a hoodie, cop a tank top. You know what I'm saying? Cop a mask. You know what I'm saying? Still wear a mask. Look, come on now. The pandemic's still a pandemic, and I know y'all don't want to act like it is, but people still getting sick out here. Trust me, I got coworkers. I got friends. All right, be careful. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you get familiar. You know what I'm saying? Take care of yourself. And look, until next time, this has been Zach. Thank you so much for rocking with Living Corporate. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.